I inherited my great-uncle's cabin in late autumn, just as the frost began to settle on the pines that lined the northern perimeter of the property. My family always regarded the place as a kind of eccentric relic and isolated outpost in the middle of a vast expanse of forest. Over time, the cabin had passed through multiple hands, but no one truly stayed there long. My mother said her uncle was a recluse, a man who found more comfort among the trees and wild creatures than in the company of humans. When the old man finally died, he left behind boxes upon boxes of notes, journals, and hunting logs going back decades. I was named the sole inheritor of the property, presumably because he had no children of his own. I was reluctant at first to visit the place. Something about it felt off, but curiosity got the better of me. So, one cold evening, I packed my duffel bag, hopped into my aging pickup, and made the long trip north. The cabin was in a state of partial disrepair. Dark logs, weathered by decades, bulged in places. Certain corners sagged. A musty odor reminiscent of damp fur and old earth permeated the interior. Dust floated through the stale air. Even with all the lights on, the rooms remained shadowy, as if the darkness was a permanent resident. I spent the first night in a makeshift bedroom on the cabin's lower level. Sleep came fitfully. There was a presence in that place, a static charge of tension I couldn't shake. The wind outside moaned around the corners, sometimes resembling the low groan of an injured animal. In the early hours, I startled awake from a dream in which the forest had eyes, hundreds of them, glowing from the eaves of the pines, peering in at me with some silent, predatory curiosity. After a bland breakfast of instant coffee and reheated canned soup, I set about sorting through my great-uncle's belongings. Most of it was unremarkable: battered cookware, moth-eaten hunting jackets, old rifles with chipped stocks. But at the bottom of a large wooden trunk, I found a set of leather-bound journals. They varied in thickness. Many appeared handmade. The earliest was dated around the time my great-uncle first built the place. The entries spoke of deer hunts and small game traps, of the solitude he so clearly valued. But as the years progressed, the tone of the journals shifted. He began noticing oddities: footprints that didn't match any known local animal, strange howls echoing through the forest at night, bizarre tracks around the perimeter of the cabin. One notebook in particular was set apart, its leather cover stained a dark brown, almost red. It opened with simple, almost mundane sketches of footprints. But as I leafed deeper, the sketches grew disturbing. One was an odd imprint of 5 long digits in the snow, each finger grotesquely elongated. Another page depicted what looked like a distorted human hand, but the proportions were all wrong. Next to each sketch, my great-uncle wrote notes: found near the deer stand, or followed trail until it disappeared at the creek. Eventually, I reached an entry labeled The Skin Hunter. My eyes skimmed the paragraphs, each word more unsettling than the last. My great-uncle wrote of a creature that seemed to take the skin of the animals it killed, sometimes leaving behind bloody, skinless carcasses. But according to him, the predator didn't always stay in one form. It switched from one hide to another. He described it as some kind of shapeshifter that absorbs the essence of its prey. The writing style became more frantic, the pen strokes heavier and more erratic. Dates blurred together. He mentioned seeing a deer that moved strangely, as though its bones were misaligned beneath the skin. Another time he saw a wolf that walked upright, seemingly wearing the tattered hide of something else. Finally, the text became downright nightmarish. Saw it wearing the neighbor's face today, pretending to wave. That was the last legible entry before a series of scribbles and frantic sketches took over, culminating in a single ominous line: if you see something that looks human but moves like an animal, run. I felt the hairs on my arm prickle and stand on end. The Skin Hunter. I'd never heard such a wild legend, at least not in any conventional sense. But the notion that a creature capable of wearing stolen skins lurked in these woods made my heart flutter with primal fear. I set the journal aside, breathing heavily, staring out the window at the dense pines. That evening, I sat on the small porch at the front of the cabin, trying to calm my nerves. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, painting the ground in long shadows. The air smelled of pine resin and decaying leaves. Somewhere off in the distance, a loon cried, I thought about my neighbor, some old homesteader, presumably. My mother once mentioned an aging man who lived a couple miles away. She said he kept to himself as much as my great-uncle did. I didn't know him. The last line in the journal repeated itself in my head like a bad echo. Saw it wearing the neighbor's face today, pretending to wave. I tried to dismiss the thought, chalking it up to my great-uncle's failing mental state in his later years, or perhaps some strange hallucination. But the adrenaline in my veins refused to subside. Every creak in the forest or rustle of underbrush set my teeth on edge. When full night descended, I locked up the cabin. I shut every window, drew the curtains, and placed a loaded hunting rifle by my bedside, feeling only a small measure of safety. Sleep eluded me, and I ended up leafing through more of my great-uncle's logs, reading in detail about odd sightings and near encounters. Some entries described footprints in the shape of a bare human foot, but far too large and with toes that tapered into slight claws. Another described finding a half-eaten deer hide nailed to a tree, as if the creature were drying the pelt for some gruesome purpose. A later entry recounted how the logs themselves had become a form of therapy for my great-uncle, a way to keep madness at bay by documenting every anomaly. Around midnight I heard a thump outside one of the windows. My breath caught in my throat. The night was silent. No wind, no rain, just a suffocating stillness. Slowly I set the journal aside, padded to the window, and peered through the gap in the curtains. Darkness. I saw nothing out there except the faint outline of tree trunks and the reflection of my own pale, anxious face in the glass. I told myself it had probably been a branch falling from a tree, but as I returned to my seat, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was watching me. My skin felt prickly with goosebumps, as if a cold, invisible hand had grazed my arm. I spent most of the next day exploring the property by daylight, hoping to find some rational explanation for the disquiet that had settled into my bones. Perhaps wildlife was more active here, and I was simply unused to it. I strolled through the dense woods, shotgun in hand, following an overgrown trail that wound deeper and deeper among towering pines. Sunlight filtered through patches in the canopy, illuminating motes of drifting dust. Every so often, a crow cawed overhead, or some unseen creature rustled in the undergrowth. Eventually, I stumbled upon an old hunting blind, a wooden platform constructed about 10 feet up in a sturdy pine. Leaves and branches obscured the entrance. It must have been decades old, yet it still seemed relatively solid. Climbing up, I found a small stool, a cracked thermos, and a pair of weather-beaten binoculars. I settled in, scanning the forest below with the binoculars. Everything looked peaceful. Tangled ferns, fallen logs, patches of sunlight. Then a flicker of movement caught my eye to the north. There, among the thick underbrush, something moved on 4 legs. Probably a deer, I thought, until I saw how it moved. Its movements were jerky, as though uncertain how each limb was supposed to function. I focused, and my heart leapt into my throat. It looked almost like a coyote, except its back was hunched, its fur patchy and inconsistent in color, like it was wearing the hide of multiple animals stitched together. I watched in stunned silence as it paused, tilted its head upward, and sniffed the air. A wave of panic coursed through me. Without warning, the creature snapped its head in my direction. Even from the distance, I could feel it lock onto me, like a predator sighting its prey. I couldn't make out a face, but I felt its stare burning into my chest. Slowly, it crept away from the clearing, disappearing into the shadows. My great-uncle's words echoed in my ears. If you see something that looks human but moves like an animal, run. But here was something that looked like a wild dog, but moved with the disturbed gait of a twisted marionette. I climbed down gingerly, scanning the perimeter before stepping back onto the trail. My heart hammered so violently I could hear the rush of blood in my ears. I made my way back to the cabin, constantly checking over my shoulder, certain that any moment I would see that patchwork beast loping after me. When I returned to the cabin, I found something horrific by the front door. A flayed deer hide, pinned to the siding with a hunting knife. The muscles of my legs went weak, and I nearly collapsed. It was as though an unseen hand had left a message for me, an unspoken warning or threat. The face of the deer was still partially intact, eyes wide in eternal shock, the entire hide stretched and pinned. The edges glistened with fresh gore. Flies buzzed around it, and the stench that wafted from it forced me to turn aside, gagging. I found no footprints or signs of forced entry. It was as if something had silently crept up to my door, performed this macabre display, and slipped away without a trace. Once my nausea subsided, I carefully removed the hide, folded it up, though the contact with raw flesh made me shudder, and disposed of it in a plastic garbage bag. I knew better than to bury it on the property. Whatever left it might just dig it back up. Instead, I secured the bag in an old locked shed out back, hoping that would at least keep the stench contained until I could figure out a better solution. That night, I kept every light on, pacing the cabin with my shotgun clutched in sweaty hands. Sleep was out of the question. I couldn't stop picturing that monstrous coyote shape in the woods, or the deer hide pinned to my door. My great-uncle's final words about seeing the neighbor's face on the creature churned restlessly in my mind, and yet there was an inexplicable part of me that wanted to find out more, to unmask this phenomenon. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I hoped to prove to myself it was some elaborate hoax. A part of me refused to believe such a dreadful creature could truly exist. I must have dozed off near dawn, because I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows. My shotgun lay across my lap, my neck stiff from sleeping upright in the armchair. Feeling groggy and unsettled, I decided to brew another pot of coffee. That's when I heard 3 distinct knocks on the door. My body went rigid. The coffee pot rattled in my hand, nearly spilling. No one ever came out this way, especially not early in the morning. With the recent horrors fresh in my mind, my heart pounded so violently that my ribs ached. Slowly, I set the pot aside and crept toward the door. "Who is it?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer, just a brief pause and then a 4th knock. I glanced through the small window beside the door. Standing on the porch was a man about 60 years old, wearing a flannel jacket and a friendly, if somewhat forced, smile. My mother's description flashed in my mind, the neighbor. For a moment, relief poured through me. Maybe he was here to check in or extend a belated welcome. After all, in rural places, people sometimes do drop by unannounced. I opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain latch on. "Hello?" "Morning," the man said in a low, gravelly voice. "Name's Nelson. I'm your neighbor." He gave a shallow nod. I noticed his features. A gaunt face with deep-set eyes like he hadn't slept in days. His skin looked pallid, almost stretched too tightly over his jaw. Something about his eyes unsettled me, but I couldn't pinpoint what. "Hi," I managed, clearing my throat. Sorry if I'm not very hospitable. You surprised me." He nodded again, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Just came by to see if you needed any help. Word travels. Heard you inherited the old man's place." "Yeah, I did," I replied, forcing a polite smile. A few seconds passed in awkward silence. The man's eyes flickered, scanning the interior of the cabin through the gap in the door. I shuddered. "I appreciate the offer. I'm just getting settled. Kinda busy at the moment." He raised a hand as if to forestall my dismissal. "No worries. If you want some company, well, you know where to find me. Doesn't do well to be alone in these woods for too long." Something about his words, about the halting cadence of his speech, set me on edge. It sounded like a veiled warning. His mouth curled into a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Then he turned away, trudging off the porch and disappearing into the trees. I closed the door quickly, heart pounding in my chest. Did I just meet the real neighbor? Or was this the thing my great-uncle wrote about, wearing the neighbor's face? I spent the rest of the day poring over the logs again, searching for any reference to a neighbor named Nelson. Eventually, I came across a brief mention. "Neighbor, Nelson Rutledge. Lives about 2 miles east. Keeps to himself. Good shot with a rifle." The entries that followed increasingly mentioned illusions or sightings of Nelson, but sometimes with contradictory details. Sometimes my great-uncle described him as a friendly older man, bringing game or sharing resources. while other times he wrote about seeing Nelson doing things that no human should be capable of, disappearing into the woods without leaving footprints, or standing in the clearing at twilight, staring at the cabin for hours, unmoving. Which was the real Nelson? Were they the same person, or was the creature masquerading as him from time to time? I felt torn between fear and a driving need to understand what was happening. If my great-uncle truly believed that Nelson sometimes wasn't Nelson at all, then I had to be extremely cautious. That afternoon I debated whether to visit the neighbour's property. If he were just a regular, albeit eccentric, homesteader, then I might find reassurance in seeing his normal life. But if I found something else, with my shotgun slung over my shoulder, I ventured in the direction my great-uncle's notes suggested. The crisp autumn air mingled with the distant smell of wood smoke. Leaves crunched underfoot, and occasionally a curious squirrel darted across the branches overhead. The forest felt tense, as if every living creature was on high alert. I too scanned the shadows, half expecting that patchwork coyote shape to reappear. After nearly an hour, I came across a small clearing. A modest house stood in the centre, smoke curling from its chimney. Nearby was a woodshed, a stack of split logs, and an outhouse. The scene looked peaceful enough. Cautiously I approached. No one emerged to greet me. I knocked once on the door. No answer. I glanced in the window, seeing a simple interior, a table, a couple of chairs, some dishes in a rack. I tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the house was neat but sparse. A single photograph lay on a small side table. Nelson and a woman, presumably his wife, smiling in front of a salmon they'd caught. But the photo looked old. Decades old. I called out, "Nelson? Anyone here?" My voice echoed in the silence. A pot of half-cooked stew simmered on the stove. Heat rose off it, so he couldn't have been gone long. On a hunch, I lifted the pot's lid. The stew was thick, meaty, and gave off an oddly metallic smell that made my stomach churn. I wasn't sure it was any normal cut of meat. That's when I heard the back door creak. I spun around, heart in my throat. Footsteps shambled through the woodshed. I caught a glimpse of movement through the side window. A figure crossing the yard, heading to the tree line. Gun raised, I sprinted outside. "Hey!" I shouted. The figure didn't stop. With a burst of speed, I ran to intercept. Near the woodshed, I found a set of footprints in the soft earth. They started out as normal boot prints, but after a few feet they transitioned into elongated impressions, the toes digging deeper, leaving behind the marks of claws. My blood ran cold. I stopped dead in my tracks, hearing the faint rustle of leaves up ahead. Then silence. Whatever it was gone. The stew continued to bubble ominously in that little house. It was real. And it had lured me out here, or perhaps just fled at my approach. Either way, the air felt suffocating with dread. I was alone, completely alone in the territory of a monster that could imitate human faces. With trembling hands, I locked up Nelson's house. Not sure if that would even matter. Then I made my way back to my great-uncle's cabin. Dusk was falling, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and red. I felt eyes on me at every turn. When I finally reached the cabin, I locked the doors and windows, then dragged a heavy dresser in front of the entry. I set out candles in case the power failed. My nerves were on edge, my every sense heightened to a painful degree. As darkness seeped through the windows, the forest came alive with unfamiliar sounds. A heavy snapping of twigs here, a low groan there. An owl's mournful hoot made me jump, nearly firing my shotgun at the sound. I decided to read the final entries in my great-uncle's journal again, searching for any clue on how to combat this creature. Unfortunately, the notes were scattered and feverish, rarely providing a coherent explanation beyond, "Don't trust what you see." Fire might be its only weakness. He described an incident where he allegedly shot at the creature while it wore the skin of a deer, only to watch it peel away the hide mid-lunge and drop to the ground in some half-formed shape. Then it fled into the underbrush at terrifying speed. He ended the entry with a single phrase scrawled in shaky handwriting, It sees me. Outside, a branch snapped. I froze, listening. A scraping sound followed, like claws on wood. It was coming from the outside wall of the cabin. My heart hammered so fiercely that my vision swam with adrenaline. I kept the lights off, remembering the note that the creature might move away if it sensed danger. Yet the noise continued. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It seemed to circle the cabin, leaving no part of the outer walls untouched. Then came a muffled thump on the porch, and the cabin door rattled. I pointed the shotgun at the door. My throat felt like sandpaper. Then, 3 firm knocks. I bit down on my lip, tasting blood. The next sound that came from the other side of the door froze my blood in my veins. My mother's voice calling my name. Thomas? Sweetheart, are you there? I nearly choked. My mother lived 3 states away. She had no reason to be here, no possible way to appear on my porch this late at night. This had to be it, the skin hunter. It was trying to trick me, luring me into opening the door. I staggered backward, tears stinging my eyes. The voice was identical to my mother's, down to the gentle cadence she used when I was a child. Thomas, it's cold out here, it said softly. Won't you let me in? I pressed my back to the far wall, flicked off the safety on the shotgun and willed myself to remain silent. My lips trembled. The door rattled again. Thomas, I know you're in there. Let me in, please, the voice insisted. A monstrous rage roared up within me. Go away, I shouted. You're not my mother. Silence. Then an eerie, giggle-distorted, half-human, half-animal. A scrape against the door. Footsteps creaked across the porch, and then all fell silent once again. I sank to the floor, exhausted, the shotgun still clutched in my hands. The night pressed in, choking me with fear. Even after the footsteps faded, I couldn't stop shaking. It knew my name, my family. It was wearing my mother's voice like a carnival mask, days blurred together. I barely ate or slept. My only contact with the outside world was the old radio in the cabin, which sometimes crackled with static-laced broadcasts from a distant station. My phone had no reception in these woods. I considered leaving, but the roads were rugged, and I feared being stuck if my truck broke down an easy target for the skin hunter. Plus, I wasn't sure if the creature wouldn't just follow me. One morning, while rummaging through the shed, I stumbled across an ancient trap, an enormous steel jaw trap designed for bears. It had sharp teeth capable of snapping a limb in 2. My great-uncle's scrawl was on a note attached to it. Use with caution. It might not stop it, but it'll slow it down. That day, I set the trap in a concealed pit near the edge of the woods, using raw meat from the freezer as bait. Sweat clung to my brow in the chill air. Every snapping twig or cawing crow made me jump. I worked quickly, certain something was watching me from the shadows. That night, the forest remained unnervingly quiet. It was as if all the animals had fled, leaving me alone with the malevolent presence that stalked these woods. Under the moonlight, the pines cast ghostly silhouettes across the ground. I paced inside the cabin, glancing at the clock every few minutes. Midnight came and went in silence. No knocks at the door, no scraping along the walls. At dawn, I ventured out to check the trap, shotgun at the ready. My stomach churned with anticipation. Maybe the creature would be there, pinned in place. Maybe I could end this nightmare. Instead, I found the trap sprung, the jaws stained with fresh blood. Nearby, a mangled chunk of flesh. Some unidentifiable piece of hide lay discarded. Deep tracks led away from the pit, but they shifted from large paw prints to almost human footprints, then vanished altogether. Despite the horror, I felt a surge of triumph. I'd wounded it. That meant it could be hurt. Perhaps there was a way to kill it. A few more days passed. My fear mutated into a grim determination. I studied my great-uncle's notes for any mention of where the creature might dwell. One entry stood out, a mention of a cave system near the creek, where he suspected the creature might hide between hunts. So I gathered what courage I had. Along with my shotgun, a revolver tucked into my belt, and a backpack filled with flashlights, rope, and extra ammunition. Early in the morning, I set out for the creek, following the hand-drawn map my great-uncle had scribbled in one of his journals. A cold wind swept through the forest, rattling the skeletal branches. The ground, covered in a fresh dusting of snow, revealed a set of footprints, human footprints, that led in the same direction I was heading. Every so often, they changed shape slightly, as though the person walking occasionally limped or dragged a foot. I trudged on, heart pounding. Eventually, I reached a spot where the creek widened into a shallow pool, its surface frozen. Beyond that pool stood a large rocky outcrop, riddled with dark openings. A faint stench wafted from the area, rotting meat, wet fur, and something else far more foul. Cautiously, I approached the main opening in the rock. The footprints led inside. The interior was dark, the stone walls slick with moisture. My flashlight's beam flickered, illuminating the jagged floor. I advanced slowly, my breath fogging the air. The cave branched off in multiple tunnels, each narrower than the last. Occasionally, the rocky passages widened into small chambers. In one such chamber, the smell intensified. My stomach lurched as I discovered piles of discarded hides animals, mostly deer and coyotes. But among them, I saw a few tattered shirts and a pair of human jeans, stiff with old blood. I suppressed a gag, shining my flashlight around. The floor was stained with gore, and clusters of flies buzzed angrily. Something rustled deeper within the darkness. My pulse thundered in my ears. I continued, stepping carefully. My flashlight revealed claw marks on the walls, forming some inscrutable pattern. The deeper I went, the heavier the oppressive atmosphere became, as if the walls themselves held centuries of cursed whispers. Then, at the end of one tunnel, I saw it. A figure crouched near a heap of skins, its back to me. Long, sinewy limbs twitched. I aimed my shotgun, the light trembling in my other hand. The figure froze, then turned its head slightly, revealing a face that barely looked human slack skin. A mouth contorted into an almost canine snarl. Patches of fur clung to its cheeks. It looked like it was halfway between transformations. My stomach dropped. I fired. The shotgun blast echoed in the cave, momentarily deafening me. The figure jerked and let out a piercing scream, an unholy blend of human and animal shrieks. It scrambled backward, staggering on all fours. I fired again. The creature snarled, lunging out of the flashlight's beam. Darkness swirled, and I stumbled, disoriented. The stench grew overwhelming. I heard the scrape of claws on rock, the ragged breathing of a wounded beast. Adrenaline surged, and I chambered another round, spinning to track the sound. The flashlight beam caught the creature as it leapt at me. At the last instant, I dove aside, feeling a hot flash of pain in my arm as it raked me with its claws. I pulled the trigger, the muzzle flash lighting the cave. The creature howled, a sound that reverberated with fury. Bleeding and terrified, I scrambled out of the tunnel, pumping another shell into the shotgun. I could hear it thrashing behind me, the scrape of claws on stone. It wasn't dead, only injured. My mind screamed for me to run. So I did. I tore through the cave's passages, ignoring the debris of bones and hides, ignoring the rancid smell, ignoring the dripping walls. My heart pounded like a war drum. The entrance loomed ahead, daylight spilling across the damp stone. Bursting out into the wintry air, I cast a glance behind me. The creature emerged from the darkness, hunched and misshapen, cradling an arm that hung at an odd angle. What little skin it wore seemed patchy, half torn by the shotgun blasts. Its face was an abomination of shifting features, half coyote muzzle, half human. And yet, within the hollow eye sockets, I sensed an intelligence, a hatred directed at me. I fired once more, aiming at its chest. It screamed again, stumbling back into the shadows out of sight. My heart hammered so hard I thought I would pass out. Then everything went quiet. Somehow I found my way back to the cabin. I don't remember the journey, only the cold terror that followed me. My arm throbbed where the creature's claws had torn my jacket, leaving shallow gashes in my skin. I cleaned and bandaged the wound, though my hands shook so badly it took several tries. That evening, I sat in a feverish state, writing everything down in a spiral notebook, my mind racing with the primal knowledge that I'd engaged in a battle with something beyond natural comprehension, and it wasn't over. A fear more potent than anything I'd known settled over me. That entry in my great-uncle's journal about seeing the creature wearing the neighbor's face now took on a horrifying significance. I had seen glimpses of its transformations, how seamlessly it could wear scraps of skin, adopt the semblance of anything it killed, or even just a voice it had learned. Just before sundown, I spotted movement outside the cabin. I dimmed the lights, peering carefully through a crack in the curtains. What I saw made my stomach lurch. Standing in the yard, waving at me, was Nelson. His flannel shirt looked shredded, blood staining one sleeve, yet his face was set in that same eerie grin. He raised his arm, beckoning me to come outside. But something was off. The proportions of his face seemed slightly misaligned, as if it were wearing a poorly fitting mask. I froze. That thing could stand there all night if it chose, waiting for me to make a mistake. My breath came in shallow gasps as I backed away from the window, the old floorboards creaking underfoot. In my great-uncle's final journal entry, he wrote a single line. Saw it wearing the neighbor's face today, pretending to wave. My mind reeled with the realization. If the real Nelson was dead, the creature could adopt his face indefinitely, or it could revert to a patchwork coyote, or a deer, or any other form it chose. In a surge of madness, I grabbed my journal, flipping to a new page. I scrawled the final lines with shaky hands, capturing the moment as best I could. My own last will and testament, perhaps. It's here, it wears his face, it's waving, I can see it, the skin hunter is real. Just then, 3 powerful knocks resonated through the door. A jolt of fear rocketed up my spine. Slowly, I turned toward the sound. My reflection in the dark window made me jump. I looked haunted, eyes sunken, face pale. Swallowing, I gathered my courage and looked again through the crack in the curtain. There it was, my neighbor, wearing a blood-stained flannel shirt, lips parted in a grotesque smile that showed off a hint of canine fangs. Its eyes flicked to mine, and a sense of vile triumph radiated from its expression. It knew I was watching. It raised one hand in a polite knock, then used the other to wave. My heart hammered so loudly I couldn't hear anything else. The smile on that stolen face stretched wider, almost tearing at the corners. I realized that if it could mimic my mother's voice, it might mimic someone else next time. Maybe me. Maybe it would lure someone else, wearing my skin. But for now, it just knocked again, politely, patiently. I thought of my great-uncle's final words, and a chill ran from the top of my spine down to my soles. Saw it wearing the neighbor's face today, pretending to wave. Now it was waving at me, and somehow, in that quiet, anxious pause between knocks, I found the voice to whisper, "Go away." It didn't. It wouldn't. It just kept smiling, waiting, pretending to be human. Suddenly, the door handle rattled. The lock creaked. I backed away, raising the shotgun again, breathing in ragged gulps. The handle stopped turning, and the banging ceased. For a moment, I thought it might leave. Then I heard a wet, ripping sound. Through the thin wooden door, I caught the faint snarls and groans as if something was peeling away flesh. My skin crawled and the air seemed to solidify in my lungs. The door shook violently. Cracks appeared in the wood. I knew the cabin couldn't hold forever. I was out of time. With desperation fueling my next move, I grabbed a lighter from the table and a can of kerosene from my great-uncle's old stash. If the logs were right, maybe fire was its only weakness. If I was going down, I intended to go down fighting and take the cursed creature with me. Shaking, I splashed kerosene across the cabin floor, along the walls, saturating the old wood. The handle jiggled again. The door splintered under a crushing blow. I felt the entire cabin reverberate with the impact. I retreated to the far corner, my pulse a drumbeat in my ears. Slowly, with trembling fingers, I lit a match. The little flame danced, illuminating the fear etched into my face. Then I flung it. Fire whooshed up with startling speed, leaping across the floorboards. I heard a shriek, whether from the creature or my own throat, I couldn't tell. The door burst inward in a storm of splinters. In the flickering orange glow, I finally saw it in full. The skin hunter, wearing a patchwork of human and animal hides, its jaws parted in an unspeakable snarl. Its mismatched eyes, one seemingly human and the other animalistic, fixated on me with pure malice. Smoke filled the air. Flames licked the walls. The beast lunged. I fired the shotgun one last time. My ears rang. The recoil nearly knocked me off my feet. The creature staggered, screeching, then lurched forward, claws outstretched. I braced for impact, but the raging fire forced it back. Its stolen skin charred and crackled, acrid smoke wafting from its body. Somewhere in that cacophony of crackling flames, bestial shrieks, and my own ragged breathing, I heard it release a final agonized roar. Coughing, eyes streaming, I backed away from the roaring flames. The cabin was an inferno. Embers rained down, landing on my hair and clothes, scorching my skin. Gathering the last of my strength, I fled through the side window, glass shattering around me. I fell onto the cold earth outside, rolling to extinguish the flames that licked at my jacket. Smoke curled from the collapsed roof. The monstrous shrieking from inside took on an otherworldly pitch, then abruptly silenced as the cabin caved in on itself with a thunderous crash. Sparks flew, ash rising into the dawn sky. I lay there panting, half-conscious, staring at the hellish spectacle. A swirl of black smoke rose from the wreckage, carrying the stench of burning flesh. For a moment I almost imagined shapes in the smoke faces contorting in agony. The faint stirrings of morning light illuminated the destruction, the smell of kerosene mingling with the pungent odor of scorched fur and wood. Tears carved paths down my soot-stained cheeks. I didn't know if the skin hunter was truly dead, but at least the cabin and the horrors it contained were consumed by flames. In the end, I left that property, swearing never to return. Authorities deemed the fire an accident, likely caused by an old stove or faulty wiring. I let them believe it. The official story was that my great-uncle's cabin burned down, taking with it all his notes, records, and possessions, but I kept the journals. I told no one about the monstrous events. It's been months since that night, and I've settled into a cramped apartment in the city. I sleep fitfully, plagued by dreams of shifting shadows and mocking smiles. Sometimes, when I pass a mirror, I pause, half expecting to see my reflection slip away, revealing something else in my skin. Paranoia lurks at the edge of every thought. Just yesterday I heard 3 knocks at my door. My heart froze. Slowly, I approached the peephole, half certain I'd see the neighbor's face or my mother's eyes staring back. Instead, it was just the postman, dropping off a package, but the fear never fully subsides. Every creak in the hallway or rustle outside my window makes my pulse race, because in my mind I replay that haunting sentence from the hunting log. Saw it wearing the neighbor's face today, pretending to wave. Even now I sometimes think I see a figure in the corner of my vision, a tall silhouette sporting mismatched patches of skin, smiling at me with an impossible grin. I'll turn to face it, heart in my throat, and it vanishes. But I know it's never truly gone. It waits in the dark corners of the world for the next time it wants to hunt, for the next time it wants a new skin to wear, for the next unsuspecting soul who dares to open the door when they hear that gentle, fateful knock.